You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra, here, who's actually a coach, which is the topic.
I know, and we're going to be writing a book about mold and coaching soon
enough.
Enough.
Yep, you keep telling me that, and I keep adding more and more things to the list of things I've got to do. But yes, we are going to write a book, which I'm not really an author, in my opinion. I'm not a good author. You are. You've written tons of books. But anyhow, today's topic is toxic mold and coaching. So I did an episode, it was episode 261, with Heather, the health coach, went through mold and Lyme herself. So it's interesting, that we're actually doing an episode around coaching. And the reason I wanted to do it is, I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I notice that I deal with quite often is, a lot of my clients need that coach.
Yeah.
They need an advocate. I'm not saying most of them are this way because I don't feel this way, but a lot of them, they do need me to kind of push them along. And I think a lot of it's, I don't know if they're fearful or whatnot. I don't think a lot of times it's a money issue. But anyhow, so that's why I wanted to do this episode. So my first question for you is why is a coach important?
I think it's what goes to what you just talked about. Everybody needs an advocate. And advocates come in different forms. Consultants are advocates, mentors are advocates, teachers are advocates, and coaches are advocates, therapists are advocates, but they don't do the same things. So I think it's really important to understand that consultants do not do the same thing that coaches do, and coaches do not do the same thing that therapists do, and therapists don't do the same thing that mentors do. Sometimes people assume that, a coach is going to do what a therapist does. No, they don't do the same, or a consultant is going to do what a coach does. And I think in your line of work, there are often times where you're having to put on the coaching hat because that is the kind of advocacy that somebody dealing with mold is going through when you're solidly in the consulting space. And I think everybody needs a good coach. Because a therapist really helps people dig deep into their history. So I look at therapists like archaeologists. They help you dig into the past and work through it and figure out what went wrong and patterns of behavior. Coaches don't dig into the past. Coaches are present focused and they are not directive. So when people think of coaches, they think of the NFL coach on the sideline yelling, plays.
Right.
Health coaches and life coaches, we do not direct. We do not say, do this. That's a consultant. So you're a consultant. When you work with clients and you get on VP, you look at the scenario, you read the questionnaire answers, and you say, okay, based on your particular situation, do A, B, C, and D. Mm-hmm. That's consulting. But coaches are not directive in nature. Coaches ask powerful questions questions because coaches firmly believe that within every person are all the answers to all the questions they are ever going to ask. The person is in the driver's seat. The coach simply helps the person do discovery. They develop the goals, they design the actions, and the coach holds them accountable to following through with the steps to achieve the goals.
That was a wonderful answer. Like, I guess I didn't really know the differences between all those things. And it makes sense, a lot of times, like, in my field and what I do, consulting, mold inspector, mold tester, IEP, whatever you want to call it, mold remediator, like we go through certain steps to mitigate or lessen the mold exposure burden. And it brings up my next question, which is really, it's interesting because I think that a lot of times people, and we've done podcast episodes, they're not sure who to hire and who they need for an IEP. But, my next question, which obviously this is based on coaching, you're a coach, you're an expert in this, but how do our listeners find a good coach when it comes to we're dealing with mold issues?
It's very similar to how you find a good doctor, a good therapist, and I think most people don't do this. You have to interview people.
Yeah.
You should not just take the first primary care physician you go to just because they're 5 minutes from your house. You literally need to go to one appointment and you need to interview them. Coaching is a bit easier to do this process than, let's say, a doctor because all of the healthcare things, but you literally do what is called a discovery call with a potential coach. If you have great coaches, the discovery call should cost you nothing.
Right.
It should be a 20 to, and you do discovery calls with.
Yep. And Heather actually does too.
Yes. So literally, that's the first. If you have any coach who says to you that you have to pay them to see if they're right for you, run.
Yeah.
It should be a free discovery call to get on the phone with them. And you should do discovery calls with at least 3 to 5 coaches. I would say 5 or more, but I know most people are tight on time. But you should do discovery calls with at least 3 to 5 people after you've consumed their content. So the most of the time when people find me as a coach, they've gone to my YouTube channel, they've listened to my podcast, they've read my blog, they've read my Medium post. They've consumed a bunch of my content before they ever reach out to me by email and say, hey, I'd like to coach with you. Then we get on a 60-minute coaching call that they are not charged for because not only do they have to see if I'm the right coach for them, I have to see if they're the right client for me.
Yeah.
I have to assess fit.
Which you bring up a good point, and I've dealt with this. It's not uncommon. It's probably a better way to look at it. There's certain clients that just aren't for me.
Yep.
And it sounds crazy. Our listeners are probably like, what do you mean? Yeah, there's certain clients that think that, I'm at their beck and call and they're really pushy. And if they're that way, they're just not for me.
And certain clients need certain things. Like I am not a coach who's available 24/7, 7 days a week. Now, if you send me a voice message on Voxer, Monday through Friday, I will respond. But as of Friday at 5 p.m. till Monday morning at 9 a.m. Mountain, I don't check Voxer. So I think as a potential client, you also have to know, like, do I need a coach who's 24/7 for me? Maybe you think you do, then find ones who respond that way. But you also have to just make sure, one, they have the background, they have the experience. In the case of mold, I think it's very important for somebody to at least have dealt with only mold in their coaching specialty, their coaching niche, or they've been through mold themselves. Not that they have to have their own mold story, but I find that it helps when somebody has lived it.
Right.
Like when I found a SIBO coach online to figure out what was going on with the SIBO issue, I never had to hire the coach because her YouTube videos and her YouTube channel answered all my questions.
Right.
And we found a solution that was top notch because she asked questions as a coach does in a YouTube video. She provided answers, but she also shared her own personal experience with SIBO. So I would say when you're looking for a coach, especially for mold, be sure that you have a health coach who's certified. I think certification matters a lot.
And what would they be certified in?
So the International Coaching Federation, ICF, has a bunch of approved certification programs that typically takes 1 year to complete the program and get your associate coaching credential, your ACC. Many coaches are actually at a higher level, PCC or master coach, MCC.
Okay.
And so you want to look for people who, especially for the arena of anything health, they have at least the ACC credential from the International Coaching Federation. And now Dr. Mark Hyman offers a functional medicine integrated health coaching certification where they actually require you
you to not only get the ICF certification, but you have to pass board exams.
Oh, okay.
So like, I think the more qualified are going to be the coaches who pass that board exam, who have that sort of accreditation. And you're going to find in the world of coaching, probably not for another 10 to 15 years, it is going to be a requirement that for you to be a coach, you have to be credentialed.
Okay. What's interesting is when you were saying all that stuff, like I remember Heather I think she used to be and maybe still is a dietitian. She has certifications, but it brought up something that we've talked about before when it comes to mold itself. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be certified, but on the flip side, for our listeners, keep in mind a certification doesn't make them qualified either. And
that's why you have to assess fit, right? Because, and here's another piece to keep in mind. Some coaches won't have the ICF credential and they're absolutely great coaches. But I think when you're new to hiring a coach, meaning you've never had a coach before, most of my clients have had coaches before me. If you've never worked with a coach before, I would err on the safe side of making sure they have a credential, but then you do the discovery call to see if they actually know what they're doing.
And I guess I just wanted to bring that up, like, just because they have a certification doesn't mean that they're qualified. No,
it doesn't mean that they're great. And so I think when you interview coaches like Heather, they get to listen to, an hour or so.
Right.
And they can go to her YouTube channel if she has one. They can go to you can Google people.
Yeah.
And you can find all their stuff and see if you're in alignment with their train of thought.
Exactly. And, it's important because, like you said, the coach doesn't have to be specialized in mold, but that discovery call will let you know if they believe even mold exposure is a problem.
Yep.
So it brings up the last question that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering, like, does Steve or CNC Contractor Services work with coaches? And I know this is going to sound crazy to say it this way, but directly, no. Do I work with Dr. Fox? Of course, she refers people. But do her and I work together with my client and her patient? No. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is your coach is there for those reasons. I'm here for these reasons, and I'm not a coach, nor am I going to, get on a call with Heather and her client, my client. It's just kind of I guess it's a weird way of saying this, but I don't understand what the purpose would be.
Well, but I also want to bring up another key point. I think one of the things that I like about your approach, which based on a lot of what the feedback you get from listeners of the podcast, but also people who do VPAs and mold consults with you, is that there are a lot of IEPs who just only do the one thing they do. If that's mold testing, if that's mold mitigation, if that's mop up. And so they're very myopic.
Yeah.
And I know that with your approach, because it's a CSI investigation, there are times where you put on the teaching hat. There are times when you put on the mentor hat. There are times when you put on the coaching hat and you ask open-ended questions. And I think even from your IEP, you should have the standard that they can put on those different hats when they need to help figure out how to solve your mold issue.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because, it just made me think of this, so we'll just kind of tap into it a little bit. But it's funny how a lot of times, and I hear this all the time, it's a conflict of interest if I'm going to do the inspections and testing to do the remediation. And for the most part, I'm like, well, yeah, I kind of get that. But on the other hand, it's like, well, what's wrong with that? It's something that we talk about quite often. And at the end of the day, and here's what I've always said, if you don't trust me to do the remediation, or let me word it this way, if you don't trust me to do the PRV testing, you shouldn't trust me to do the remediation. Now, PRV testing is a little bit different just because it's post-remediation verification. But really, at the end of the day, that's to me like saying to your orthopedic surgeon, I don't trust you to order the MRI and then to do the surgery, and then after that, if there's still problems, to do another MRI or an X-ray. I don't personally see what the conflict is. But if you don't trust me to do one part of it, then you shouldn't hire me to do any of it.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's important to also illustrate, because I know you said, it's not like you have a roster of coaches that you refer people to or coaches that refer people to you and you guys partner.
Right.
That you don't work that way. But I think it's important for people to understand, which is why we're going to write the molding coaching book. How does coaching fit into this bigger picture? Now, somebody works with you and they do a VPA, they do several mold consults. You have helped them develop a plan for how they're going to get from mold testing testing, through mold mitigation, through PRV, through mycotoxin testing. So you have basically consulted with them and you've helped them through the plan.
Right.
What do they say? They say, God laughs when people make plans, something like that.
Yeah.
Like, so you get this beautiful plan because Steve is your consultant and it's all laid out and life happens. That's where having a coach like Heather becomes critical, because as you're getting thrown curveballs at work and curveballs at home and blindsided here and so stressed out and a new diagnosis of this and a new diagnosis of that, and you thought you were healing because you were doing infrared sauna and ozone, and now your health is taken 10 steps back.
Right.
Your health coach helps you navigate the in-the-moment transitions that you need to make. And your health coach is the person who reminds you, okay, what's your goal here?
Right.
What do you want to work on this week? How do you want to shift the plan given what just changed?
Yeah.
Because you may not be able to get in a consult with Steve when everything goes to hell in a handbasket on a Wednesday night, but you have a coaching session scheduled with Heather on Thursday.
Right.
And she can help you work through the emotions and work through the process and think through next steps. And she holds you accountable for taking the next steps.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting because, you kind of brought up something, and I deal with this quite often with clients, whether it's VPAs, consulting, remediation, where they think like it's an emergency on Wednesday night because this didn't happen. And it's a difficult position I get put in. And I'm like, well, it's not an emergency. You had this mold issue probably for years in your house. Like, I guess that's kind of off on a little tangent I went off.
No, but I think it's important to have but that's why it's important to have a team.
Yeah.
Because there might be a Wednesday night issue that causes a ton of stress, and they can't get in a mold consult with you till the following week.
Right.
But if you have a health coach who you meet weekly, which typically it's weekly 1 hour calls, then you're going to talk to that health coach.
Right.
You can set up a doctor's appointment for next week, the same day that you're talking to Steve next week. But the
Exactly.
in-between is the hard part for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you kind of mentioned partnering with people, like, especially when I deal, it's not really the coaching side, but when I deal with the medical side, it really does help, like if Dr. Fox says to you, we'll ask Steve about what he thinks about an ERMI test, and then I'll explain to them how an EMA, in my opinion, is better. Like, we obviously partner with people, but going back to what my question was, do I work with coaches? I don't directly work with even doctors. So anyhow, that was a great episode. A lot of information. Like I said, it helps that you're a coach. You've been doing this for 2 decades now. And I know a lot of our listeners, I think that they feel like they don't have an advocate or somebody on their side. And you can always, like I said, Heather does discovery calls. I apologize to our listeners. She's the only coach that I've
interviewed so far.
And been in contact.
So far.
Exactly. And so, obviously there's more out there, but if you were to ask me who I would recommend, she's the only one I've dealt with. So I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there, but it's just a topic that, it's very important to have a good coach. And that's why, obviously, having consultations with me is very beneficial. So great topic. I appreciate you taking your mold hat off and putting on your coaching hat. But for all of our listeners, we appreciate all of you for listening. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.